Ruth, I just wanted to ask you a question about your sense of how long historical moments are, and I guess that it's an abstract way of asking you, do you think that we're still in the Kurt Waldheim moment? Or do you feel that it's what we're living through now is an echo of that? That it's something that keeps repeating?
Well, in a way, Waldheim was a forerunner or an avant-garde of what we have today. It's hard to say. It's strange that the film is so timely. I didn't intend that, and I didn't expect that. It's good for the film, it's bad for the world that we have today these Orbans and Trumps and our government. But when I started to do this project, I watched the material I've shot.
Yes.
With my son, who was at the time maybe 22, and a couple of his friends, and they immediately talked about Nixon.
Really?
Yeah, because they, you know, today the kids, they live in a globalized world.
Yes.
So they had no idea who Mr. Waldheim has been, but they said, yeah, he's a liar, like Nixon.
Like Nixon.
Nixon,
Oh.
yeah. That's what was their reference.
Yeah.
So it was interesting for me to put this in an international context and to make a kind of more abstract film and not about Austrian history and stuff. So I don't know if we live in the same, if today we can compare, but we can talk about the later maybe. It's very hard to think about parallels today.
Yeah, parallels or continuations or echoes, depending on what metaphor you're looking for.
There is a real echo, I think, you're right. Not in his in the personality of politicians, but in how you can win elections.
Yes.
I think that's the same. I mean, we had elections in Austria last year, and at the time, his party used antisemitism.
Mm-hmm.
Today, they used xenophobia and racism, and they won again.
Like Jörg Haider used Nazi slogans when he was running. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's always the same mechanism. Just create a hostile other and...
Yeah.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, in this year's festival, there are also films. Errol Morris made a film about Steve Bannon. Right before the festival, Michael Moore made a film about Donald Trump. And there's a film about Watergate, Nixon. And people were really repelled by the very idea of having to watch a movie about Trump or Bannon because they just, kind of had enough of them. But the film about Nixon was something that, there was a different reaction to.
Interesting.
In terms of the dialogue with now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect this response, I must say, to my film.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought I'd make a small film for some interested Austrians.
Right.
But the film opened in Austria and Germany last week.
Yes.
And it's amazing that the cinemas are sold out in Vienna.
Yes.
And there's so many young people coming.
Yeah.
So I wondered why, and I think, my response is just not, it's based on a couple of days of this film being in cinemas. Yeah, it's not a long-term thing, but I think these young people, they look for help for their own protest, for their own will to protest what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
because there were pupils who asked me very pragmatic questions. How did you get these posters into the room where the press conference was?
Right.
How did you do it that they didn't throw you out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Questions like that. So I had the feeling that it gives them some energy to, that even a small group of people, and we have been very small group of people in the beginning,
Yes.
can do something and change something.
Yeah, maybe you have the impression, as I do, that for a lot of people, unless it feels like it's big right away and that there is a groundswell of support, starting small feels too daunting. It feels too difficult to do. Maybe you have some questions from the audience if anybody wants to jump in. Yep.
Yes, I was wondering, I had heard that actually the Simon Wiesenthal had actually discovered all of these things and then gave it to the World Jewish Congress. Do you have any opinion about that?
Did you say that
Did
Simon Wiesenthal
discovered everything about Waldheim?
No.
Mm-hmm.
It was this Austrian journalist, Hubertus Czernin, who found this document saying that he was in this as a youth movement and the horse movement. No. On the contrary, Wiesenthal, who was member of the same party as Waldheim, defended him in the beginning because Wiesenthal was only interested in real Nazi war criminals. And Waldheim was not a war criminal. Maybe he wasn't even a Nazi. He was mainly a liar. Of course, he was an intelligence officer, meaning that he knew a lot. But there's no proof that he was interested to have a career in the Nazi period. He was an opportunist. He knew, maybe he felt that this will not last long, and he planned to have a career afterwards.
Where did the reporter dig up the information about Waldheim? Was he
In
why
the
was he digging?
Austrian National Archive.
Yes.
And Waldheim thought, I mean, he asked the permission of Waldheim, because you have to have the permission to get into data, which is personal.
Sure.
And Waldheim was sure that this was cleared, that somebody had taken it away before.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how the whole thing started.
Mm-hmm. When did you actually start working on this film, conceiving of it?
I started in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
but worked on it only about 3-4 months, and then interrupted the project to do the Dreamed Ones.
Yes.
And then I started again 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
You know, besides the obvious
Oh.
what's happened here in this country in the last month, with people telling the truth or not telling the truth, or lying, there's a deeper question that resonates with me, and that is, how do people change? How do the grandchildren learn about the experience of their parents and their grandparents and challenge them? We've seen some films from Germany where young filmmakers have done it. But this film, and the voices that you chose of the Austrian people speaking, were older people, almost to a point. And I wonder what the impact you want or you think can happen with younger people to deal with anti-Semitism and a history of anti-Semitism.
So first of all, I just want to say we had 3 people in a row who raised their hands who are in roughly the same place. So we can keep the microphone in that area. A very interesting question from Jim Farrat about how younger people can deal with the question of anti-Semitism and change. Because, and if I understand you correctly, Jim, that most of the people in the film interviewed are older, but what does Ruth think about the possibility of young people actually coming at the question from a different standpoint from a different angle?
Well, as I said before, it's amazing that there are mainly young people coming to the theaters, and that they're so, I mean, this was also my starting point, showing the material I shot myself to young people, because I didn't want to make, in the beginning I didn't want to make a film about Waldheim because I lived through it. So I said, why should I make a film? But because those young people were so interested in it, and maybe not only concerning Austrian history, but globally, I mean, Austria unfortunately became quite mainstream. We have Italy, I mean, this is much more dangerous. We have a right-wing government in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland, and we have so many Western countries going towards a kind of totalitarian spirit, let's say, that young people are worried about it and they're interested in how this works. But I must say, I was able, this is not answering your question, I just want to add it because it's important for me. I myself was able to make a film which is also funny maybe, or I was able to look at it with a kind of light and amused gaze, because in the end it was good what happened. It was good that this finally happened and Austria started to talk about its own past, and that this all these lies about being the first victim of the German Nazis broke apart, and so that's in this case it was good, but in this case, in the case of Waldheim, it was about coming to terms with the past. Today, these governments, including our own, is trying to change the present and the future in a way taking bits and pieces from Nazi ideology, racist and Nazi ideology,
But they're also
totalitarian ideology.
But they're also trying to retell the story of the past as well, as a way of dealing with the present and the future.
Sure, I'm not talking about Waldheim's past during the war.
Yes.
This is because...
No, but I mean the whole past, to
Yeah.
just retell, to reformulate the story in a different way. It's happening here, certainly.
Yeah, I
and throughout
tried to... I wanted to put this story in an international context,
Yes.
because I thought it's interesting how different the view of this case was in the States, in Britain, or in Austria.
Yes.
And in this scene in U.S. Congress, where the son and Tom Lantos are kind of talking to each other, is so dramatic. I mean,
Yes.
there the whole drama comes to one, is in one scene.
Yes.
So it's all the
scene that wouldn't-
contradictions.
A scene that wouldn't really be possible today.
Yeah.
Actually. Yes.
Yes, my question was a bit linked to what you said about that this entire Waldheim affair also opened up a chapter in the history of Austria where for the first time they dealt with their past. And I wanted to know if the Austrian People's Party has come to term with Waldheim. Do they still praise him? Have they made any efforts in the past, 20 years, to kind of acknowledge that he was lying or whatever? And how has his memory been, what is the situation now with his memory in Austria amongst the right-wing party and right-wing supporters?
Well, no, his memory is almost gone. I mean, he's not known anymore very much. Maybe because of the film he's known again, but was quite forgotten. But the Austrian People's Party didn't really say that this campaign, this anti-Semitic campaign, was a mistake. We had a discussion, I think 3 days ago, after a screening in Vienna, and they had invited his campaign manager at the time. And I asked him bluntly, would you say that this was a mistake? And he answered, anti-Semitism is always bad. General terms. And for instance, saying a thing like that, someone in the public asked him, why did you use this yellow paper for your posters? We vote for whom we want, and because, it's referring to the Yellow Star. No? So he said, this was very simple. We wanted it to be pink. And, how do you say? Oh. The Drucker. The who? The printer, of course, thank you. The printer said, I cannot do it in pink that fast. That's how we decided for yellow. After 32 years, you hear that.
Mm. He didn't say, I'm the least racist person you'll ever meet. That's one of my favorite statements. Did you have a question as well? In between? No? Okay. Yes. Wait for the microphone. Here it comes.
Congressman Solar's referenced a letter and magazine articles from a few years earlier. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Can you say
Congressman Solar's referred to magazine reporting and his own letters from a few years prior to '86. And can you tell us a little bit about what happened in that period?
The letters that Solars refers to prior to '86. When you say, can you tell us about what happened in that period, just what do you mean about when the articles that he's referring to originated, or?
This was a very small article, I think in the Atlantic, and nobody knew about it. Definitely not in Austria. And this was the first time, this interview with Solars was never screened, transmitted on Austrian TV. It was an Austrian journalist who had asked him, and he had never before really spoken about this letter. Because there were no proofs. If you don't have a proof, there were no documents. Only in '86 they found these documents, so you cannot accuse someone without any proof. But there were doubts. I think I love this scene, the first interview in the film with this former Yugoslavian guy who remembers when Waldheim went to Yugoslavia and told Tito he had never been in the country before. Of course, Tito knew everything about Waldheim, I suppose.
Dueling questions. Oh my God. Wow. Why don't you both talk at the same time, and then whoever made the best.
We'll share the microphone.
Okay, there you go.
I just want to start by saying thank you. We were born in '82 in Vienna, and I vividly remember my parents supporting Waldheim and thinking what a disgrace it is. And I think it's really an important thing to revisit the history. But I was curious, when you did the research for your movie, was there anything that came out that wasn't previously known? Were there any interviews you did that surfaced new information about that Waldheim story? And your question?
Yes. For instance, the hearing with Waldheim's son was a big surprise for me to find that, because it was never transmitted. And for me, it was the first time that I worked with archival footage and TV footage. And I found out that most archives only keep what they transmit. So the rest is thrown away. But sometimes mistakes happen, fortunately, and they kept this whole material, which is about 40 minutes all in all, with the sun. So they asked, of course, I didn't know everything. I mean, this was the time before internet and before satellite TV. So what we saw in Austria was Austrian TV. And I didn't know what the BBC, for instance, had shot at the time. I mean, we've seen all the crews of different TV stations in Vienna. And fortunately, they have been there because it was only them who were interested in our side. I mean, this French interview, for instance, with an Austrian journalist, or Hubertus Czernin, the one who discovered the documents. I searched for an interview with him in Austrian TV. I mean, he was such an important person. Nothing. The interview you've seen in the film is from an American station.
Well, I'm also from a family who supported Waldheim in 1986 during the campaign. By the way, great movie. I really enjoyed it. My question is, how did your own personal perspective change about Waldheim from the 1980s when you were protesting and filming on the street, covering his campaign, to now, after you're done with this film?
Well, at the time I was very angry, of course, and I hoped that we can stop him. Today, as I said before, I think it was time that it happened, because it was a turning point in Austrian history, and if it wasn't him, it would have been another event, because, as I say in the film, I mean, the mid-80s, Reagan in Bitburg, the film Shoah, and so on, the end of the Cold War. I mean, it was the moment when the perspective, the focus shifted towards the real victims of the Nazis. Before, it was a lot about resistance and war stuff, but only then, I mean, the term Holocaust emerged in this very strange American miniseries, Holocaust.
In the late 40s somehow.
No, in the end of the 70s.
Yes, I know, the TV series,
yeah.
yes.
But only after that, people talked about the Holocaust.
Yeah, and then Lanzmann redefined it and
Yeah.
gave it a new name, the show.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to just flip the question a little bit, the terms of on which we're discussing the film, and to ask you about the choices of music, because they're very, very precise, and as you said, it's a very funny film and a very lively film, and the music actually plays a very important part in that. So why that particular kind of music, actually?
Well, there's not much music, only in the beginning and the end. And in the beginning I wanted to, from the first moment, make it clear that this is not a heavy history lesson. And the music is by a young Austrian guy. And the music in the end is an adaptation of Mozart. So I always I'm treating or working, molding the archive, and this musician, Jacques Lussier, he's working on Mozart. So in my previous film, I had The Dreamed Ones, I had Vivaldi by Piazzolla, you know. I always like this, that we make something new. We have a new gaze on tradition. And Mozart is Austria, like the waltz.
Yes.
And I definitely didn't want to have a waltz in the film.
You wanted to call it the Waldheim Waltz without having any waltzes. Maybe we'll have time for one more. Yeah. Wait for the microphone. 1 second.
So I also grew up in the 80s, and I remember my parents watching the Barbie trials and speaking about the Waldheim affair, but from a Jewish perspective. And I guess I'm wondering, well, two things. Number one, how did this moment change the Austrian relationship to the Holocaust in terms of, let's say, reparations or anything like that? Did it trigger some kind of actual apology or acknowledgement or something like that? And I guess my second question had to do with the role of the scene with Kohl and what the German reaction to the Waldheim affair was, how the Germans kind of if they played a role at all.
I only understood your last question.
The first question did the events that happened with Waldheim trigger anything in Austrian culture and at the government level that would be the equivalent of some kind of official apology? Not really, huh?
Today, you mean?
No, at the time.
Then,
at the
no,
time.
no,
Yeah.
not at all. No. I mean, it was a turning point. I mean, so many discussions started after he was elected. He was completely isolated, and in 1988 we had this commemoration year, 50 years after the Anschluss in 1938, and every day there were discussions and panels. And I remember when Waldheim was president, many school classes turned around his picture, because in every school class you have the picture of the president, so they turned it around. So I mean, this was really, and I think, I mean, that helped a lot. I mean, Austria became a much more open society, and I mean, now we'll see what happens now, but it was quite good in the end. And for your second question, well, the film was also opened in Germany last week, and we had an amazing amount of press, and at the Berlin Festival it was packed with people and many discussions, because they can relate to it today, because they have this right-wing movement getting stronger and stronger. And yeah, it was very strong response. And Kohl, of course, he supported Waldheim because it's the same party. It's the same party family, the conservative parties.
Ruth, thank you very much for coming
Thank
with your
you.
film. Thank you, everyone.